So, hi Andy, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you, Raj. Yeah, how about you?
Fantastic. It's good to see you again. Thank you very much, my friend, and thanks for
Good to see
joining
you.
us. And how are things
Pleasure.
in the UK at the moment?
Um, okay, I mean, we're still in lockdown.
Hmm.
Most people are sticking to the rules, and the rules are that you can have one walk a day, and to go shopping. But yeah, so a large proportion of the population is keeping to that. The weather's okay, so that's easier, and for those that have gardens and things, they're obviously making as much of the weather as they can. So it's okay. We're getting through it, but obviously very aware that some people's experience is horrendous, and massively aware that it's not all plain sailing for people. Far from it.
Yeah, I understand. Thanks for the update. So, you and I go back many, many years to a far distant galaxy. I actually met you when I was working for an outsourcing firm many years ago, and you also became one of my clients after I left that sector to run a consulting and training company. So, I thought, what better person to talk to about outsourcing and experiences of outsourcing? We're not going to mention clients or company names or anything like that, but what I want to do love to do is to get you experience on, your experience on outsourcing. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to just throw in a few questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so in your experience, how many different outsourcers do you think you've worked with over the years?
Um, Probably over 20 something years. Five, I guess. Five. The world that I was in always tried to find long-term relationships and not sort of fleeting, hurried forays into ill-fated contracts. So yeah, over that period, I guess five would
Okay,
cover it.
and from a geographical perspective, where were they kind of based around the world? Which countries?
Uh, so we were in. So I worked with a UK-based company or a headquartered company, and so we used Ireland. We had Dublin at one point. We had Northern Ireland at one point was another outsourcer. We had Germany for a long while, and the longest stretch time was in the UK. We had a sort of home rooted outsourced relationship for many years in the UK.
Okay. I know in the early days when you and I were working together, one of the things I did is I helped you find some outsourced partners. And there was an interesting story with that because I remember at the time that you wanted to stay within a certain geographical location, and we went far, far beyond that. But
Yes.
how did you, in your experience, how did you find outsourcers when you weren't working with me, or how did you go about finding them?
So, well, trawl the market for a start. Who are the main movers and shakers? So, I was working for a sizable, blue chip company. So, that we didn't tend to go for the smaller companies. It was the larger companies.
Hmm.
See who the market, leaders were, and then we would put a trawl out to those companies and begin the assessment process to see who we should be looking at. And of course, as you quite rightly say, one of the main prerequisites was getting a location relatively close to where my company was headquartered in London. Didn't always work like that because sometimes the opportunity with an outsourcer was clearly so positive that we would make compromises to get the right sort of people with the right attitudes. So yeah, we would trawl the market and then begin a process of evaluation that would take it from I don't know, a field of maybe 5, 7 down to maybe a field of 3, and then down to 2, and then we make our decision.
So your shortlist would have been what, about three organisations, and then you'd go from there.
Yeah, so we'd probably take it. Excuse me. Sorry. We take it to about 5, and then we'd run some more evaluations, take it to the 3, and then the decision would be made around, we get to the final 2, and then that would be a very, very focused process of evaluating those 2 outsourcers, very, very closely, very a huge level of scrutiny on their operation. So that's when we'd invest the time and energy and really getting into the deep and the down and the dirty. Yeah.
Excellent. And talking about evaluation process, I mean, how did you evaluate them? The initial shortlist and get down to the from say 5 to 2, and what lessons did you learn in the evaluation process?
So a general, it was an RFP, a process where the outsourcer would fill in a very, very detailed document and would return it to us. And then based on the answer to those questions, we'd select the people that appeared to have the closest fit, and that would be the first sort of stage of losing the people that didn't really display the skills that we were looking for, and then we would put another questionnaire out to the next group, really sort of concentrating, and that wasn't so much of a template. Now we were really trying to tease out the detail, and then for the final 3, again we would hone in on the areas that were very important. And I should also say for the final 5, we'd arrange site visits and client consultations as well. So we'd start to really get into the into the sort of detail within the business and really start to sort of live it and understand how they worked, how they ran their business. So yes, it got very detailed towards the end. So by the time you got to the final 3 and then the final 2, you were having a really good view of who your favorites were at that point, but you just wanted to be absolutely certain. So you'd have another sort of last gasp of detail going in for the final 2, and then you'd make your decision. So it was a long and detailed process, and because also that several people were making the decisions, it wasn't always that easy, because different elements of the business might be looking for different characteristics. Some people would be heavily process led, while somebody like me, who obviously cares about process, would be very, very soft skills led. What is going to be the user experience, the customer experience, etc. So it would amalgamate all of those separate areas, and we'd hone it down to a point where a decision was obvious. If that makes sense, there would be no dissenting voices when it came to choosing the right outsourcer. Everybody will be on the same page.
That's really good. And what sort of lessons did you learn in the process of when you're going out doing the site inspections and talking to their clients and stuff like that?
The biggest lesson I learned was don't take, and I mean this with a huge amount of respect, but don't necessarily take the word for it. So if you're told that training is a very important part of that outsourcer's philosophy of providing excellence in customer care or sales or whatever it is, what's the provenance in that? And phone the company, find the clients, make those calls, go into the company and ask to just merge within that company. If somebody says we've got an open door policy, test it, turn up and ask to see whatever you can to back up that assertion. And obviously there are issues around confidentiality and permission from other clients, but just make sure, don't take anybody's word for it. Look for your own provenance wherever you can.
Interesting. Really good points. I know from my experience of working with you, Andy, as you were once my client as well, when I worked for an outsourcer, you were very good at helping the outsourcer succeed. And that's one of the things that not many organizations actually put a lot of effort into. So what were the things that you actually did to help your outsourcing partners succeed?
I think you give them the best understanding possible of what it is you're after. So be deliberately detailed at every step of the way. Give them examples of what it is you're looking for. So if there is a best-in-class company that are delivering excellence in service, say to them, this is where we're aspiring to reach. This is what we're looking for. Give them as much detail as you can on the products that you're selling. Let them become immersed in those products. Have a major role in the recruitment process. Be very clear about the type of person you're going to need to manage the calls. Be very clear about training and what it is you want training wise. Train the trainer and make sure that that the people delivering the training are advocates of and enthusiasts for your products and services, and make sure that you're creating an environment where the group of people who are supporting you think of themselves vastly more as supporting your products than they do think of themselves as working for the outsourcer. And that's the aspiration, that's where you need to get to. So whatever it takes to get to that point, support, deploy staff locally if they can be spared to spend time in the center, create the training materials and evolve the training materials, give them loads of product to try. Let people take stuff home and play with it. If it's a product that can be used at home, a domestic product, whatever. Just give the outsourcer as much as you possibly can to feel ownership of the product and understanding of the product, and to become an enthusiast for the product if it's a product, or the service if it's a service.
Excellent. And how do you ever deal with, you start working with an outsourcer and they say they have an open policy, and then they start trying to keep you away from the operational teams. To me, it's important for a client to have access to the frontline staff so that you can communicate, you can build that brand, you can build that, as you said, you can get them close to you and what you're trying to achieve. How do you deal with organizations that say, no, we, come in once a month and talk to our team? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think you'd set the parameters at the evaluation stage. So if any outsourcer said, I'm sorry, we only allow the client in once a month, they would fall off the list instantly. There's got to be an open door policy that, whilst, one understands that, they're not there just to be at your beck and call. They've got a business to run. But at the same time, I would expect to be able to go in, and my team were able to go in, not to have to be chaperoned in there, but just to be there as a support function, to do, monitorings and to support the team, and be there as an expert in the product range or whatever. I always felt that any outsourcer that didn't feel that was an opportunity for them, we didn't want to be working with them. So normally that expectation had been set, and where we had very successful relationships, and one outsourcer particularly we had a very long and fruitful relationship with, the attitudes from the people on the ground were so positive towards us, the client. It was a joint effort. We were a team. So when it works, it's amazing. When it doesn't work, it can be very, very difficult. And there are times when there can be a shift in the way that people work, because maybe there's a management shift or something.
Okay. Without going into too specific on the next question, but what sort of pricing, or what was the pricing model that you used to work off when you did this? Was it per call? Did you pay for dedicated agents? What sort of worked for you guys?
Well, in all my time, we probably had a bit of all of those. If I'm honest, we paid for teams at some point, because again, as our product evolved and grew and became a massive product, the way we dealt with the products and supported the customers had to change. But I think for me, the model that worked best was on a per minute basis, and on a per minute basis that stepped down as the minutes increased.
Right.
So as the volume came in, the per minute rate dropped, and therefore the outsourcer was dealing with their kind of margin and all of that sort of stuff, their fixed costs, etc. And then as the call volume grew, our costs came down, and their profits sort of remained, if you know what I mean. So that seemed to work very well. Everybody was happy with that. But yeah, we've used solutions that have involved just having a set number in the team and set hours, and in certain types of teams that can work very well as well, because it's a fixed cost, and that also works well when you're pretty sure how much call volume you're going to get in,
right.
over a range. A lot of our problems in the business that I was in was that it was very spiky call volumes, and so we would have sometimes a blended environment working with a dedicated environment, and the permanent model meant that we could be very flexible.
Understand, makes sense. And what about contracts? There's always this issue because you're working sometimes with long-term contracts with an outsourcer, if it's the sort of type of activity that you used to do. What do you think clients should always look for in a contract when they're going to sign it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, etc., based on your experience?
I think that that if things start to go wrong, that there can be a review process that can be taken, that can be begun, as and when there is some sort of dispute or some sort of issue, and it's not always a dispute. So, for example, if a pricing model at the very beginning proves to be a challenge for the outsourcer, it's kind of foolish just ploughing on whilst the outsourcer is doing everything they can to repair their margins. So I'd say have some flexibility in the contract, but for me, I always felt that the contract was the contract, and we put it away and we'd get on with the job. And if you did ever need to get the contract out and look at it and go, well, hang on a minute, you said and we said and what have you, you probably got serious problems at that point.
Right.
So the contract should allow yourself some flexibility on both sides, because sometimes things go wrong and it's not quite as anybody thought it would be, and there has to be the ability to take a step back and go, does this still make sense? Are we still doing the right thing with the right people? Do we need to make some grown-up decisions here, and can the contract allow that to happen on both sides?
I understand. So it's almost like when you're dealing with employees as well. There was an employee contract. You have it in the bottom drawer. You don't really get it out unless there's an issue. And then if there is an issue, you'd follow some steps that were written in the contract. So to either resolve it or agree to part company. Yeah,
and Raj, one of the biggest challenges we had on several occasions was, with all sales, you buy the people, and I've had a really, I've worked with some fantastic people over time who really just got what we were doing, were passionate about it, and put everything into it. And often when that person or those people left, or there might be a buyout or some management change, a whole lot of new people would come in and go, well, let's have a look at this contract. Oh, hang on a minute. And then everything would change. Right. It was a time of a review, if you like, from the outsourcer side. So it's all down to people in the end, and you can try and reflect that in the contract, but often people go far further than the contract would state, and make it something that comes alive and works, and that everyone is on the same page. And when that's happening, it's like an orchestra playing beautifully together, right, in sync. And then suddenly you get a new conductor coming in, everybody's off time and all the chords are wrong, and you've got to sack the orchestra.
Exactly. Interesting analogy. So because you mentioned earlier on as well, you'd worked with agencies in Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, UK, Germany. Did you ever notice any cultural differences in the way they looked after you or the way they serviced your clients, your customers?
Yeah, there are differences. all of us, our cultures are all different. We all have ways of doing things. In some countries, there's far more formality as the norm, and I think, in the UK we're pretty informal, though some would argue that's not the case. So, I think that you have to allow for that. The way that you train people sometimes has to be slightly different, and the way that you approach training and your expectation of how that customer will be serviced. And I suppose I'm talking about sort of, again, kind of language blended environments where you may have someone with first language skill supporting maybe the English language, people who speak excellent English but as a second language, but employ the formality of their own culture. And it's very difficult to sort of break that down, and so in the end you end up sort of finding a compromise between what to the British or English sensibility is slightly formal and slightly rigid way of dealing with it, where we were looking for a more informal. And in the end, you have to do your best to train those people and to try and help them to understand culturally what we're looking for, and then find a sort of center point where it's not ideal, but the job is being done, etc. So I think there's that, and also I think as well about the way that businesses are run in various territories. We've worked in territories where it isn't acceptable for the client to just turn up and sit in the centre. There was clearly times when that wasn't a good seen as a good thing, despite us saying it's a prerequisite. So yeah, there are cultural differences, but actually the differences, most of those differences can be dealt with if you support the outsourcer, and to help them to understand exactly what it is we're looking for.
Just on that point about different languages as well, something I just always wondered how you guys used to do it, but when it comes to listening into calls and reviewing calls, if it's in English, and you have an excellent command of English as I do, but how did you actually ever deal with it in a language that you weren't familiar with? How did you actually make sure the quality of the calls were there, and if you didn't have anybody in your own team who actually spoke that language?
It's a really, really good question, Raj, and it's a really big challenge because you're sort of blind really to the subtleties of what's being said, and you're reliant on people who maybe are not working for you but are working for the outsourcer. In the company that I was involved in, we got around this by using local people that were employed by the company that I worked for, and they would become the sort of quality people and the training people and would become the eyes and the ears. But it is a challenge if you don't have that. This was a very large multinational company I was with. If you don't have that, it can be a challenge. So this is where having a good relationship with the outsourcer and having people that you can trust, who are seeing the opportunity to reach a level of excellence as the end game and will do everything they can to help support you to achieve that. That's the vital thing. It's when you've got this brinkmanship of trying to do as little as possible to get as much as possible.
Right.
That's where it can all turn a bit ugly. But again, how do you know? Because you start to see the customer complaints coming in, you start to see the emails coming in, and at the end I used to do things like just put an email that one of my spies had sent me through Google, Translate, and and sort of get the gist of this person, was rude and dismissive and what have you. But it is difficult. It's very difficult to support other languages if you don't speak that language.
How often did you actually meet with your outsourcing partners? Did you have like a regular schedule? You'd meet with them once every 2 weeks, once a month, or did that vary depending on where they were based as well?
I think it varied. So in the UK, we would go in once a week. We would have a set day to go in, and so the outsourcing partners' premises became a sort of a satellite office for us.
Right.
Further away, well, yeah, I mean, when we were in Germany, I would probably go to Germany once a month, and members of my team would also go out, so we'd alternate, but we'd always be a presence. And again, from the German center that we used, we actually had someone from our team, redeploy to live in Germany for us. He was more than happy to do it. He loved the place, and that worked for us. But what I think the risk is, and I've seen it in other areas that I've worked in, that you set up an outsourcing relationship, you get everybody trained up, you go live, and you take sort of 3 or 4 weeks interest in it, and then you lose interest, or other things take priority, really, is the way to describe it. And then it all starts to fall apart, because if you don't support the outsourcer, it's very difficult for them to continue that good level of service. So I would always say to people, invest time in spending time with the contact center provider. But also, here we are in a time when Zoom calls and remote monitoring, it's never been as easy. So a lot can be done just to be a presence and advise and guide and what have you. Don't just leave it alone. Nurture it and love it. And it's like a garden. Another analogy coming up, Raj. Like a garden, if you don't water it and sprinkle the grass seed on, it will wither and die.
Yep.
I'll give you that one for nothing, Raj. That's
Thank you. Thanks, my friend. And just the very last point, building on what you just said, what other sort of hard lessons did you learn along the way from your experience of working with outsourcers?
Be very careful about being seduced by massive promises and anything is possible attitudes. So where I got the most the most comfort was when people were honest and said, okay, no, we're going to tell you that's going to be a bit of a struggle. Let me come back to you and see if we can find a way through that. And that's kind of what you want to hear. Mm-hmm. What you don't want to hear is, yeah, absolutely everything is possible. And then, when you get down to it, it's just been a fabrication. It's just a sort of fantasy to get the business in. So be aware of reality. Understand what the challenges will be for the outsourcer. Give them as much help as you can, and if everything sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah. Interesting. Lots. You're a fountain of knowledge. I've said this many times, Mr. Barker. You really are.
Fountain of knowledge.
Exactly.
Something.
Yeah. So I want to thank you again greatly for your time. It's I can't thank you enough. That's how you and I met through the outsourcing world. So
it's my pleasure, Raj. And as you say, we go back a long way, and you helped us an awful lot at the beginning to find our feet, and we learned as we went. So again, I think one of the main points is people are new to outsourcing is you learn as you go to a degree, but there are ways of mitigating the risk and reducing the exposure.
Definitely.
But as you go on, you yourself become an expert, and that's when it can fly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Andy. You take care of yourself, and you guys stay safe. And we'll be in touch again with you shortly. Take care.
Fantastic. Take care, Raj.
Bye.
Bye.